Hello, and welcome back to Hangar 51. So today we're going to do a little servo resurrection. So for you guys that have any of these Metal Gear servos, especially this particular servo, which is 26 gram E-Flite servo. This particular one was on the rudder of a the Carbon Z Cessna 150. It's an all Metal Gear servo, and it failed, and it failed to the point of burning up. But why did it fail? Because this is the second one I've gone through. The other one just spun like it had a stripped gear, and at $30 a pop, I decided we need to investigate and see what's going on here. So I'm going to take this apart, and I'm going to show you what's going on inside, because you're going to be amazed that this servo is repairable if it didn't burn up. Now, how does it burn up? Well, in this particular case, I had the wind blow me off the runway. I was flying in 30-mile-an-hour crosswind gusts, and which this plane handles it very well, but there's always that moment of unexpected downdraft that you can't see, and drives it into the ground pretty hard. So that's what happened here, and it had locked the servo. I'm going to show you why, and it sat there against the motor trying to center itself, and it burnt it up before I could get out to the plane. It was pretty far away from me, and I wasn't in any hurry to get to it. I just walked out there casually, and by the time I got out there, the servo had burnt up because it couldn't move the servo back to straight, neutral, so it would stop hammering the motor. So it burnt up. So what I'm going to do here, obviously it took off the bottom of the case, and nothing in here is what we're looking at. We just want to look at the gears. So I'm going to take the top of the servo off for you here. Okay, and what we have, first of all, there's a ball bearing down inside here. Let's try to get this in focus, and so you can see it down in there. That's a ball bearing right there to support the main shaft. And what you have in here is, as you can see, the motor's here. Okay, the motor comes up inside a little half-shielded stem right here. Okay, right underneath this bell, it looks like a bronze gear. I think most of these gears are bronze. This one's aluminum. All these other gears are bronze. Okay, and this one's got a bell on it. And what's under there is a stem of the motor coming out with a very tiny little gear on it. And it's shielded by a little plastic thing. Now that little gear there from the motor is driving this gear down here. If you can see down in there, there's another bronze gear right there in the middle. This is the counter shaft here. Okay, so you've got your motor and a shaft coming out of the top of this plate here. And you've got your main servo over here. This is where the servo arm connects. This is main gear, which has the pot attached to it. So the centering pot is on this gear. And then you have a counter gear running up here. And the counter gear has a small tiny gear right there at the bottom of it. Okay? And that runs on this gear of the bell, which turns it that spins this gear, which spins this gear, which is not attached to that gear, by the way. They're on the same shaft but not attached. Which in turn turns this smaller gear here, which turns this gear. So it goes from the motor to this big gear here, which is turning that little gear there, which spins this gear here, which is attached to this gear, which drives this gear, It's attached to that gear, which drives this gear. It's a little complicated, but that's how it, because the motor's spinning so fast, it's kind of like a watch. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the inside of a watch, but there's a lot happening inside there. Okay? And so this gear here, down here, is the one that's actually hitting the motor. And it spins, like I said, this gear that's attached to it, which spins this big long outer gear on the bell, which is attached to this gear, which spins this gear, which is attached to this little gear underneath it, and then that spins the main gear. So on the counter shaft, there's actually 1, 2 attached to each other, 2 gears, and then 1, 2, the bottom gear attached to each other. So there's 4 gears, but they're attached to each other. These 2 are attached, and these 2 are attached. Okay, and that's what spins all of this stuff, and that's what drives this gear back to center so that the pot will stop moving it, so it finds center. And when it can't move, it burns the motor up. So why couldn't it move? Well, I'm about to show you that it's actually the problem with this particular gear, or this servo, is the counter shaft is bent from the impact, from the wind driving me into the ground. It actually bent the counter shaft. So let me pull that out of here and I'll show you what I mean. Actually, you don't need tools. You can just grab a hold of this center gear, because that's the first gear that's kind of come off, is the counter gear in the center. You pull straight up on that. Okay, and the shaft might come with it. Okay, see, it did. Okay, and that small gear has a spline on it that goes into the gear in the bottom. You might get able to see that bronze gear now in the bottom. That's the small one that runs off the motor. So that's the first gear that touches the motor, is the one in the middle there. That shiny bronze one in the bottom here. Okay? So, let me pull the shaft out. Now see, this little gear here, there's a spline in the middle of that gear. The bronze one in the middle there. And that's what this little gear actually runs into. But here's the center shaft. Let me set it down here on the paper so you can see it. Can you see the bend in it? Maybe I could pick it up and hold it to the camera. So it's, let me see if I hold it this way, maybe you can see it better. Yeah, that shows up pretty good. You see the bend? I'm rotating it around. So that bend, depending on where it jams, okay, is either going to hold the sprocket away from the gear, which will just let it spin freely, and it'll sound like a stripped gear. You'll hear the motor running and nothing happening, because this bend has pushed it away from the motor, and it's going to spin freely because there's nothing contacting, or it's going to push it into the motor, which is going to jam it, which is what happened on this particular servo. The other one was just the opposite. The pin was bent just like this, but it had bent away, and the other one just spun, sounding like it had a stripped gear. We've all had plastic gear servos strip, and you hear that, you know, whining sound of the motor running and nothing happening. Well, on a plastic gear servo, it's usually just a stripped gear. But on these metal gear servos, I wanted to see if it was all metal inside or if something else was wrong. I was not expecting to find this. This was amazing to me, to find this shaft bent the way it is. You know, just from the hard landing on the nose gear, which of course it bent the hell out of the nose gear, but that's a pretty weak nose gear anyway, so you know, that gets bent quite often. You know, if you don't have a pretty perfect landing, you know, generally speaking, on that particular airplane. The nose gear takes a beating. And, you know, now I've got, you know, I just for you guys to understand the situation here, this plane is almost 5 years old and has way over 1,000 flights on it. And I can tell you why I know that. Is because I fly it every weekend for 5 years. It's 52 weeks a year. And 6 flights on Saturday, 6 flights on Sunday. Now, yeah, of course I've missed a few weekends, but I also have flown it during the week. Some weeks too. So I'm not exaggerating when I'm estimating that it's been flown 12 times a week for 52 weeks times 5 years. So you guys can do the math. Okay? 12 flights times 52 weeks in a year times 5 years. And that's how many flights this thing has on it. And that is pretty damn accurate. You know, it's an estimation, but believe me, it's close. Because I fly the piss out of this airplane. It's just a lot of fun to fly. It flies great in high winds. I mean, ridiculously high winds. Like the day I was flying this, where it was 30-mile-an-hour winds. And it just handles it well. So I just got, you know, I got the wind on top of me, a gust of wind hit the top of the wing and just drove the plane straight down. All the up elevator I had was not enough to stop it from just driving it into the ground. You know, when you don't have much forward motion because you're fighting a 30-mile-an-hour headwind, and that gust of wind gets a hold of you, that's the result. So let me straighten this. It's pretty easy to do. It's not a very hard pin, which is part of the problem. You know, they should have made this out of harder metal. So I'm going to try to grab it with these 2 needle nose pliers here and take a stab at straightening it. On camera, which is very hard to do. But I think I got it. That looks pretty straight. Probably straight enough. They don't have to be exact. And this looks, yeah, I'm rolling it and it's rolling pretty straight. So that was probably good enough. And now it's going to go to get back together much easier. It was hard to get apart because it's jammed against the other gears because of the fact that it's bent. But now it's straight. So let's put this back together. So you have to put that little gear on first. See, like that? Because that's the one that's going to plug into that bronze gear on the bottom here, the very bottom in the middle there. That's going to slide into that. And then you put this counter gear here on this way. The small gear down, the big gear up. Okay? So those two actually sit together. It would seem I don't have it completely perfectly straight because it's not going back together really smoothly. Let's see if I can figure out what's going on here. Sorry, I'm on the camera there. I'm trying to see if I can see where the bend might still be. It looks like it might have just a slight bend over here. About right there. Just inside the pliers there. So let me try straightening that just a tiny bit more. The reason my hands are shaking, guys, is because I'm actually leaning on my elbows. Got a lot of weight on my elbows, trying to steady myself over this camera and hold these pliers right in view of this camera. This is very hard to do, guys. I gotta tell you. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's try that. And again, this particular servo is not going to work again because it's burnt up, but I'm keeping it for the parts because if I had this out at the flying field and I happen to bend another one of these servos or somebody else does, we can cannibalize this servo on the fly. Yeah, that flipped back together, so I got it. We can cannibalize this servo for this pin and put it in somebody else's servo and save the day. And they'll be flying again. And, you know, so I always keep this stuff around. Now, see, that slid right back in beautifully. So everything's back together now. And if the motor wasn't burnt up in this servo would be perfect now. So all these gears are good in here. That pin is now straight. So that's good now. This pin's straight. So there's a lot of usable parts in here. The pot, you know, this outer gear, if you know, say this, the splines where the servo arm goes, say that got damaged or the hole got stripped. Okay. On another servo, but the servo works. Well, we cannibalize that piece out of this servo, put it in the other one, and we've got a good servo again. So I hang on to everything, guys. I never throw nothing away. And so anyway, so that was the cause of the problem on this servo, and it was the same way on the other one. See, now this stuff you can see is rolling. You know, the servo arm is rolling around, which it wasn't doing before because of the bend. It was jammed up. This is slightly loose because it has to go in. There's two holes in the top of the case here that the pins actually go into for alignment. And that still has to happen. And then, of course, this is supported on a ball bearing to where the servo arm goes. So when you slide this all back together, and everything fits perfect, and it slides right together, and there you have it. It's good as new. You know, like I said, if the motor hadn't burnt up in this would be a perfectly good servo. But mechanically, it still is a perfectly good servo. So if I ever need any of the gears out of this servo, or that shaft, or anything else out of this servo, hell, even the plug, you know, if I needed this particular plug, because the wire, it's a long wire, you know, and it's got a plug on it. I can't even show you how long this wire is. Let's see it. Roll it around there, and roll it around again. And the servo's over here. So it's a pretty long wire. I'd say it's about 18 inches on this particular servo. So that's usable. You know, everything pretty much but the motor, I believe, in here is probably usable. I think the only thing that's bad in here is the motor now. So we snap it all back together, put the screws back in it. And again, I'm sorry, sometimes my hands are in the way, but this is pretty delicate stuff. And I've got the camera on micro right up against it. And I don't even know if we're staying in focus. I hope it's mostly in focus. And then you put it all back together. You throw it in the toolbox. Generally what I do with servos that don't work anymore but are still good for parts is I tie a knot in the cord, you know, in the wire. That way I know if I'm looking at a servo in my box that has a knot in the wire, that means the servo doesn't work. It's only good for parts. That's how I keep it straight which ones are good and which ones are bad. So if I've got a servo in my box with a knot in the wire, it's not a usable servo. But it's good for parts. That's why it's in my box. Just for parts. But we're not going to expect it to work. So I'm not going to waste time installing it in an airplane only to find out, oh crap, the servo doesn't work. With a knot in the wire, I've already marked it. This servo doesn't work, but you know, if you need a part out of it, you're good to go. And of course, I'm going to remember, because this is the only spare servo I have from my Cessna, and that's the only place that this particular servo, which is, by the way, this particular servo is an E-Flite I believe it's an LR. Let me make sure of that. Yes. So it's an EFLR7145. 26 gram digital metal gear servo. Okay. And so now I'm going to put the knot in the wire like this. Doesn't matter where the knot is. As long as I've got it, when I pull it out and I see a knot in it, I know that this servo is no longer usable as a servo, but it's usable for parts. That's how I mark it, to make, you know, just keep it straight in my toolbox here, that this is not a usable servo, but it's good for parts. So anyway, guys, that's it. That's the story on this. If you have any of these particular servos or anything like it, take it apart. Listen, it's not that complicated, and if you just, you know, really look at it close and keep track of it, and keep this video marked, because all servos inside internally are the same. Of course, they might have plastic gears, they might have some plastic gears and some metal gears, but they all are stacked the same way. There's always well, there might be exceptions to this, guys. You know, it's never an exact science, but most servos I've ever looked in, there's a motor with a shaft, a counter shaft, and then the main shaft where the servo arm goes, which is right here. And you know, so you've got, it's always three sets of gears here, the counter, and then the end, and the motor's always on the end, and there's always a stack of gears. And if you just follow the way that they're stacked carefully, and you take it apart, you'll be able to put it back together. And I would advise, listen, you all have digital cameras in your phones. You know, as soon as you get the lid off, gently take your phone and take a picture of the stack of gears before you start pulling anything apart. And then you can always use that as a reference to go back so you can see how the gears went in the servo if you get confused. It's the easiest way to do it, is just take a picture of it. And then if you get really stuck, you can come back to this video and check it out, and it'll probably be helpful to see that you watched me take it apart, put it back together. And but now this particular servo mechanically is fine. It just has a burnt motor, but this servo would work otherwise. You know, could I replace the motor in it? Sure. Yeah, I could pull a motor out of a bad servo that uses the same motor and put it in this one and make a good servo out of this again. And that may actually happen, you know, depending on, you know, if I find a servo that has the same motor in it, or one close enough that it'll work, I may just do that. But my main goal today was just to show you guys these metal gear servos, what probably failed in it. You probably did not strip a gear. The metal gears, this particular one is all metal, so it's pretty hard to strip a metal gear like that in a servo. So my thought was there's possibly something else wrong. I was not expecting to find that pin bent. That surprised me. I don't know what I was going to find, honestly. I wasn't thinking about it. I just figured there's probably something else wrong. And if it was a strip gear, I wanted to see it. And when I found that pin bent, I was like, wow, that took a lot of force. Think about it. You know, that's a tiny little pin in between gears that are all sandwiched together with supports on both sides of the shaft. You know, there's a support in the bottom of the servo and the top of the servo, supporting that shaft. And there was enough torque force on that arm to push that gear, the counter gear, over and bend the pin. And that was pretty remarkable. I was very surprised to see that. But I was also very happy that it, you know, I found it and fixed it, because the other servo's back in the plane and working perfect. And that saved me 30 bucks, guys. I was very happy. Now, I did actually find that the old Futaba standard size servo, I don't remember the number on it, honestly, at the moment, but the old Futaba servo was the same servo, the same spline on the arm. So if you have any of the older standard size servos that Futaba had back in the 80s laying around, the servo arm will pop right on it. Different screw, because that was standard servo was a plastic gear, and it had a a sheet metal type screw in it, and this one's got machine thread in it. So it was the screw was different, but it worked, and I was able to fly the plane for a while with that servo in it. And we're talking again, guys, 5 years, over 1,000 flights. This plane's been through hell and back. I mean, it's got a lot of miles on it, but it still flies fantastic. It still looks pretty damn good. I mean, from 10 feet away, it looks nice. And you get up close, and there's a lot of hanger rash on it. I'll be honest with you, I've done more damage putting it in my car with 8 other airplanes, because that's how I roll. I fill my wagon up with 6 to 8 airplanes every time I go, and some of them are pretty big. And when they're jamming into each other while I'm driving down the road and hitting bumps, and they just keep banging into each other, I get hanger rash on my planes pretty severely. And I really need to stop doing that, but when I go to the field, I want to fly. So I'm going to make sure I have enough planes that if something goes wrong with one, for whatever reason, I have something else to fly. And so I always go pretty loaded. And I pay the price. It beats the planes up pretty bad. Either carrying them to the car or jamming them in the car. So, but anyway, alright guys, so I'm going to cut this off. Thanks for watching. Subscribe at the bottom if you haven't. Hit the bell down at the bottom here. Go, it's somewhere down here. Hit the bell. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button if this was helpful. Leave a comment, please. I enjoy your comments. And we'll catch you on the next review. So we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.